Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be doing another what's inside video, and we're going to be tearing apart a radiator that I just took out of an Acura TL. Now I can't really disassemble the radiator too much, guys, but I'm going to do my best to show you how the inner linings and workings of it are. So with that said, before we go ahead and begin, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button down below. Definitely smash that like button, and let's go ahead and begin, guys, and tear this radiator apart. So this is our radiator, guys. Typically when this would be inside of a car, this would be facing towards the engine. This would be where the upper hose goes. This is where the lower hose would go. And then we have our transmission cooler right here. Now, it's really hard to open up a radiator, mainly because the way that these things are assembled, there's only so many parts in them. Is basically all these little fingers are bent over, and then these end tanks are glued in there. Now, I'm not gonna be able to spend the time to sit there and try to remove every little finger off of this. So my way of ripping into this, guys, to show you the internal workings would be to sawzall this section off and show you how the cooler and everything in there works, and then possibly cutting the radiator in half this way to show you the cores and everything. Now, there's no proper way to cut this. I don't really have a laser cutting machine or a water jet to give me clean cuts. We're gonna do it old school, basically a sawzall with a metal blade. We're gonna go ahead and rip into this. So let me go ahead and get my sawzall prepped. The first cut that I'm gonna do, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to record it, guys, because I gotta hold the radiator. I'm gonna probably be blocking the view, but I'm gonna go ahead and make a center cut to begin with, mainly because that will actually cut the cooler here for the transmission in half as well, and show you a nice side view of that portion. And then what we'll do is maybe take off about half of this plastic and show you the actual internal workings of the cooler. Now I'm gonna go ahead and we're going to take our sawzall and we're going to cut this in half. I have it sitting on top of my trash can, and that's the main reason why I want to be careful when I cut it, because I definitely don't want to cut my trash can in half. So I'm going to go ahead and make that center cut, and I'll be right back with you guys. Alright, so we have our radiator cut in half. Now, I'm going to explain to you guys the cuts that we made and what we're looking at on here. Now, clearly the first cut that we made was cutting the radiator in half. As you saw, we went straight along here. Now, here's the issue when it comes to cutting one of these like this, guys. It's aluminum, so you'll see the aluminum is bounced up together here. It'll just kind of like mellow itself. The way that this works, and I will probably actually have to demonstrate it on this side, is the cut that we made is just an aluminum strip. It's basically blocked off. In between here, we have these thin tubes. If you guys will notice here, I know it's kind of dirty, but you have these little opening cuts. Basically, the coolant will come in here. It'll flow through those little inlets right here up top, and it'll make its way all the way down. The fan will blow cold air here, and we got a huge aluminum surface area here. Takes out the heat, and then basically reignites to the other side where it's nice and cool. Now, here's the thing. I don't know if the hot side is starting from the top or the bottom, but basically it comes in hot on one side, goes through the heat exchanger, air blows through it, heat gets dissipated, and then winds up being cooler at either end. Now, one thing that you guys saw that I cut off of this end, and let me go ahead and position this one here correctly, is that you notice that I cut this side out, and we have an additional item here. Now, this thing is kind of leaking all over the place, so I'll kind of zoom you guys in on what this looks like. Now, this is normally attached to the radiator like this, and this is a transmission cooler. If the radiator was together, and let's say this was all glued back, you see you have an inlet and outlet port for your trans cooler. Now, I was able to cut the transmission cooler in half. And the way this works is the transmission fluid will flow in here as coolant is flowing in this end tank, which is cooled down coolant. And what it does is it'll radiate the heat to the colder coolant through this heat exchanger, kind of like a little mini radiator. You guys can see now this one, when I cut it up, it kind of got mutilated here, but you see those little pass-through fin areas where the oil passes through, and then what it does is it'll radiate the heat out and into the cooling system, and then the cooling system will go ahead and cool everything down there the way it should. Now that's the basic principle of a radiator. Sometimes what happens, and you've heard of transmission fluid mixing with a radiator system. What happens in that scenario, guys, is if you ever get a crack or a leak inside of this transmission cooler, what will happen is whichever fluid is under more pressure, which sometimes the cooling system has more pressure, it'll force that coolant in there, and then this will loop around back to the transmission, and you wind up getting a coolant and oil mixture. The latest case that I've seen in situations like this, I know Ford's had a lot of issues with it, especially on like a 04, 03 F-250. And I know because I have a plow truck that runs a radiator. It's a F-250. It's a 2004 with a 5.4 liter. And I had my oil cooler for my transmission fail, and I got coolant inside my transmission. And I got really lucky because I was able to save the trans because I, kind of knew what happened. And I was able to pull the truck over, get it towed back here to the shop because I was out plowing snow by my house, and I was able to drain all the coolant and trans fluid out, flush everything out, and save my transmission. Because when you get coolant inside of a transmission, that calls for a bad day, guys. You will wind up destroying the transmission, and that is not a cheap and expensive repair. So that's what happens when you get mixing of coolant and transmission fluid. A lot of people I know have been very curious about that, so this is the perfect time to explain that situation. But other than that, guys, your radiator is actually pretty basic. Now, a lot of failure points that happen on radiators, and what happened on this particular radiator, you'll notice that there's more bluing over here. I don't know if the camera picks that up, but what happened is right here you will see this plastic end tank is, let me see if I can get it a little closer, but this plastic end tank is basically crimped and glued on here. Over time, the glue that is holding these two together will give out, and you'll get coolant leaking out through these little side grips here, because this tank will go on there. There's some glue, and then they crimp it on there nice and tight. You guys can see those little crimp fingers on there, and it's a really sturdy design. But after so many cold and hot cycles, eventually these fingers get weak, or the adhesive will let loose, and you'll wind up getting a leak of coolant coming out from the end tank, getting all over the radiator. And that's what happened on this one. You'll see it was more towards the center. That's why it's a little bit bluer there. Now, this is a pretty standard setup, guys. This is how most radiators are built. You have your radiator, you have your transmission cooler. It's not uncommon sometimes to have stuff like a coolant sensor built into the radiator. Now, all this really is a cutout right here, and it flows all the way in there, and the sensor basically just sits in there, and it measures the outflow temperature. Sometimes manufacturers can have two of these. They'll have one on the engine, one on the radiator, and it'll compare the difference in the cooling effect. I've even seen some manufacturers where they run 3 or 4 of these. Well, they'll have a radiator inlet, radiator outlet, and the engine, let's say right and left side. Sometimes they'll even have like an upper or lower, so you can run a lot of coolant sensors if you really want to be critical. But for standard issue, typically there's 1 or 2 sensors. In this Acura's case, it uses one here and one on the engine block. So 2 sensors, and that's just drilled into the plastic. They put a fitting on there that's blow molded onto the end tank, and it just sits in there. It's not really anything technical in there. If I were to take my light here just to show you guys and put it right through where that sensor goes through, you will see, it's kind of hard to get in there, but you will see a little light come out in there. I don't know how well the camera's picking that up. Probably doing a bad job at angling it, but maybe from here you guys can see the opening. I really doubt it. It's very difficult to see, but it's just a simple pass through, real quick and easy. That's pretty much what's inside of a radiator, guys. Hopefully you guys found this video interesting. I do this series just because I have a bunch of parts that fail, and I decided to show people how they're made, what they're made of, how they work, and where the common failure points are. And this was the latest rendition to that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Please comment, like, and subscribe because it definitely helps the channel grow. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.